Those born into this hell have no remembrance of anything else. Those who survived, those are the truly broken, for they know what was before.
No! She's knowledge from the numinous, divinely inspired. She wills herself upon this world. Look! See, here, divine meets drive shaft in a symbiosis of faith. Modded and made to measure. What's with that old-time religion, huh? No time like the present.
Said it can't be done, but our time has come. We play with fire and burn.
The test. Lifting up in front. Yep. About 2 inches. The front of the 71 El Camino is complete. Corvette suspension is completely mounted. Everything's lined up. Everything's straight. Everything's in place. Locked in. Back on the ground. Phase 1 of the suspension is complete. Now it's time to move on to the rear. First things first, cut out the bed. I had some help. I had Steve come down. You remember Steve from other videos. He helped me drive a few cars out to the racetrack. He helped us out at the Wild Card car show. And he's always great to have around and a super good worker. He knows what he's doing, no messing around. Glad to have him. So I had him here to help me tear out the bed of this thing. Because the El Camino is built off the same chassis as the car, as the Chevelle. So the back half is built roughly the same way, with the difference of the extension of the bed added on the back. So that means there's multiple layers of steel to cut through. As you can see inside, this is where the spare tire would fit, or the back seats on the Chevelle chassis. And on the El Camino, it's basically a storage space with a little plate mounted on top to finish off the bed of the truck. It's actually kind of fun. Try to like maybe flip this way like that. That's what I was trying to do, but still.
I wasn't recording, put it back on.
Now before we even think about putting anything inside this chassis, I have to get rid of everything else that's old, all the old parts. Now because this has been sitting out in the field in the mud, it's been buried for years and years and years, everything is seized on it, nothing's moving like it should. Funny thing is some parts are and some parts aren't. The bearings, everything, the steering, it all rolled really well, turned, no problem pushing in the shop. But the suspension wasn't compressing because everything was C-solid and none of the bolts were coming out. So you know what that means? Time to chop and cut. No remorse, no forgiveness. Just rip all that out, make room for the new. The old differential weighs a ton. It's a straight axle, 1971. It is a ladder bar style suspension with springs and shocks, which are separate, not coilover style. And everything is solid, heavy steel. Putting the independent rear suspension from the C4 Corvette should be lightweight, make it more nimble, handle better. The only problem is now we're pulling even more weight off the back of this car than we would have before. Balance is going to be a key thing here. As far as I'm concerned, the hardest part is done. Now this should be the easy part, right? It should be straightforward, the rear end, make sure it fits straight, square it off, make some tabs and weld it in. I had already measured before the car even got inside the shop, and the Corvette subframe or the Corvette rear differential, all the brackets, everything fit directly in between the chassis rails. I took this as a good sign, thinking that we put it in place, make some brackets, and everything's gonna work out fine. But boy was I wrong. Out of the way, and it's time for a test fit. It's pretty easy to slide this thing underneath since it weighs nothing. I had a couple dollies to help me move it around easier. Put the jack underneath it, lift it up, put it in place, and that's where the fun begins. Start thinking about brackets, designing them, how they're gonna fit, how they're gonna work. Because the mounting points sit in between the frame rails, I have to make my brackets to sit inside the frame, come off the frame, and they have to be strong. Once it's all squared and lined up to perfection, start making brackets and welding it solid in place. Now I don't want this to move, so right now I'm just making temporary brackets, if you will, which will have to be strengthened up later. But I have a whole idea for what's gonna happen later. There's gonna be a whole phase of just going through this thing and making sure everything is nice and tight and solid and fits good and looks good, it's smooth, it's not janky looking, it's not weak, but that's gonna come much later. Right now, it's all about getting this rear end, this independent rear suspension from the C4 Corvette to fit properly inside the El Camino chassis. The metal that I used for this was a lot that I used for the front, the same kind of stuff. AJ got me a big sheet of metal from where he works, which proved to be a major help. I couldn't be happier with that. Thank you, brother. Really appreciate it. So I had to make some brackets for the rear end. Now, since it sits inside the chassis, I have to build them so they're far enough away that it grabs the mounting points, keeps everything centered, and has enough meat on it to grab the chassis, the frame, on the outside. And the other thing I had to do was, because of the way the frame is on the stock El Camino, I had to make the brackets in the front of this a little taller than the rear ones because of the swoop of the frame, because of the way it bends and the way it moves. I had to do it like that to make the differential sit level and sit properly. Now everything's in place, everything's lined up, everything's tacked in, it fits beautifully. Next thing I have to do is make a mount for the front of the differential. In the back, there's two ears, two big brackets to grab. but you have to keep that stable somehow, moving forward, backwards. It's not gonna go left or right, but it could go up and down, move inside. So we have to make an adequate bracket for this. Now the only problem is I don't have the materials to get across the chassis something solid, and I'm not sure where the drive shaft and everything else is gonna land, or exactly how I'm gonna do the cage work in the rear yet. Fortunately, the subframe of the truck passes. There's one that passes right in the back that was holding the original shocks, and that's kind of in place. I have to cut it down a little bit to make room, and I have to cut a chunk out of it to be able to clear everything. But I can use this to measure everything up, make sure it lines up, tack on this bracket that I made, and still be able to control the pitch. Now the thing is, when you're hooking up a differential and a transmission, there's a rule about having the same pitch on the transmission as you do on the differential, because at your connecting points you want that the same angle. I don't know if you guys get what I'm saying here. It's kind of tough to explain, but if the motor front to back sits at 2 degrees, you want the differential sitting front to back at 2 degrees as well. If your U-joints are misaligned like that, it's not good news. So I've been told. I've never experimented with this, I've never tried it, but I'm just going off of what professional guys have told me, what people that have done this before have told me, and guys know a lot more than me, because I said it before, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of winging it. It's a learning process, but I'll take advice and information wherever I can get it. As of now, everything's gone smooth, everything's gone steady. There's no reason for it to not continue like this. So now I throw the wheels on and get it on the ground. And then I see it. The problem, the issue. Put the brackets too far back. So I've basically got to rebuild the whole thing, insert, sad scene, whatever, contemplating. I'm optimistic, no problem. Slow down, stop, regroup, rethink, replan, level yourself, don't get too frustrated, and keep moving forward. Here I see a problem. I didn't know this was going to be one of a few problems. I mounted the brackets and everything a little too far back. I must have miscalculated somewhere or misjudged, and I'm pretty sure I figured out where I went wrong, but it doesn't really matter because it's all got to come off and be redone. So now I have to relook at the project, rethink it through, make a new plan, and figure out how to remedy the problems I have. I measured from the wrong point on the fenders, not taking into account on the inside of the measurement, and it looks goofy. It looks wrong. Now everything fits and it works in that spot, or so I thought. So I was contemplating maybe welding it like that. But taking a step back and seeing how it looks, it's really kind of weird. It was back too far. I'm not sure if that's something I want to play with, having a wheelbase that's back further. The solution to make it look okay would have been to cut the fenders, move the fender wheels back. I could have done that, but it's screwing with a lot of geometry, and I don't want to make this car any longer than it already is because it's already a monster. So now it's time to rethink the strategy.